30 days before one of the most important Democratic primaries in the entire country, a candidate just walked away, and it completely rewrote the math for everyone else still standing. It wasn't a scandal, it wasn't scheduling conflict, it was a campaign quietly running out of oxygen, squeezing between millions of dollars in outside spending and two rivals who had already claimed the party's two clearest lanes. And what's left behind is a race that's becoming one of the sharpest ideological showdowns happening anywhere in the country this year. Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow, once viewed as a genuine rising star in Democratic policies, suspended her campaign for the state's open Senate seat just a month before August 4th primaries and after ballots had already started going out to voters. In her announcement, she said that she was ending the campaign but not the fight, thanking her volunteers and staff without offering a detailed explanation for the timing. People close to the situation pointed to one major factor. A flood of outside spending had made it nearly impossible for her to keep pace financially in the campaign's final stretch. The timing of her withdrawal is almost as magnificent as the withdrawal itself. By the time McMorrow ended her campaign, many voters had already begun paying close attention to the race, and in some areas, absentee and early voting material was already being distributed. That means that her decision doesn't simply remove a candidate from the conversation overnight. It also forces thousands of voters who may have already made up their mind to quickly reconsider the choices during the final week of the campaign. In close primary, even a relatively small shift in voter behavior during that period can have an outsized impact on the final result. Campaigns also become increasingly difficult to sustain during the final month. Advertising costs rise, fundraising becomes more competitive, and candidates are expected to maintain an aggressive travel schedule while responding to constant media attention. When financial resources begin to dry up during this stage, rebuilding momentum becomes incredibly difficult. That is why campaign suspensions so close to election day are often less about the single event and more about the cumulative effect of months of fundraising challenges. That outside money came from exactly where you expect once you see the numbers, and understanding it matters enormously to grasping this race. The American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee poured millions of dollars into advertising specifically supporting Congresswoman Haley Stevens, spending that neither McMorrow nor the progressive rival could realistically match. McMorrow had built her campaign specifically without corporate PAC money or a point of pride she highlighted directly in her exit statement. But it also meant that she was competing against an opponent backed by one of the most well-funded outside groups in American politics without anything close to matching resources of her own. Outside spending has become one of the most defining features of the modern Senate campaigns. While candidates raise money through their own campaign committees, independent organizations often able to spend millions of dollars in advertising, voter outreach, and digital campaigns without coordinating directly with the candidates themselves. Those outside groups can dramatically reshape the information voters see during the final week before an election, especially in expensive statewide races where television advertising remains one of the largest campaign expenses. Supporters argue that independent expenditures allow organizations to back candidates who reflect their priorities and amplify issues they believe deserve greater attention. Critics, meanwhile, contend that larger amount of outside spending can make it significantly harder for candidates with fewer financial resources to compete on equal footing, particularly during the final weeks of the statewide campaign when advertising becomes increasingly expensive. While campaign spending alone doesn't decide elections, there is a broad agreement that it can play a major role in shaping a campaign's visibility and competitiveness. History also shows that endorsements don't automatically determine where supporters ultimately go. Although high-profile political figures can influence public opinion, many primary voters make their decisions based on their own priorities, policy preferences, and impressions of the candidates themselves. Some of Mallory McMorrow's supporters may ultimately lean toward Haley Stevens because her broader coalition of endorsement and governing approach, while others may be drawn to Abdul El-Sayed's outsider message and progressive platform. Others could remain undecided until the final days of the campaign. That uncertainty helps explain why both campaigns are working so aggressively to win over McMorrow's supporters. In a race that's expected to be decided by a relatively small margin, even a modest shift in these voters could prove decisive. And because McMorrow chose not to endorse either remaining candidate, every vote that was once part of her coalition is now is now genuinely up for grabs, making the final week of this primary even more unpredictable. What McMurray's exit actually did was strip away the middle lane entirely, leaving Michigan Democrats with a stark, binary choice between two very different visions of the party. On one side sits Haley Stevens, the establishment's clear preference, backed by Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, former Senator Debbie Stabenow, and now Michigan's own Democratic Attorney General Dana Nessel, who endorsed Stevens within hours of McMurray's withdrawal. On the other side sits Abdul El-Sayed, a physician and former Detroit health official who built his campaign around single-payer healthcare and sharp criticism of corporate money in politics, backed by Senator Bernie Sanders and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This split isn't happening in isolation, and that's part of what makes it so consequential right now. El-Sayed's momentum picked up notably after a trio of congressional candidates backed by New York City's Democratic Socialist mayor won their own primaries last month. A result that's been read across the party is evidence of real energy building on its progressive flank heading into the midterm cycle. Whether that energy translates into an actual statewide win in Michigan is exactly the question this specific primary is about to answer. And the contrast between these two candidates isn't just ideological, it's stylistic in a way that's becoming impossible to ignore. Political consultants watching this race closely, including someone without a horse in it, have pointed out that El-Sayed brings a level of natural energy, clarity, and social media instinct that Stevens simply has not so far. Precisely the kind of momentum Republicans are reportedly counting on to help shape their own attack strategy heading into the general elections. At the same time, Stevens has leaned into a message of experience and pragmatic deal-making, a case for steady hands over combative energy in a genuinely uncertain political environment. That contrast reflects a broader debate unfolding inside the Democratic politics across the country. Some party leaders believe the strongest path to victory runs through the candidate who emphasizes stability, experience, and bipartisan appeal, particularly in competitive swing states. Others argue that voters are looking for candidates willing to challenge the political establishment more directly and advocate for larger structural changes on issues like healthcare, housing, education, and campaign finance. Michigan provides a particularly interesting testing ground because it contains elements of both political worlds. Michigan, however, provides a particularly interesting testing ground because it contains elements of both political worlds. The state includes larger urban populations, suburban communities that have shifted politically over the past decade, union household, college towns, and rural regions that often vote very differently from one another. Building a statewide coalition requires candidates to appeal across these very different constituencies, making campaign strategy especially important. National Democrats are watching this specific primary this closely for a reason that goes beyond just who wins a Senate seat. This race is quickly becoming a live test case for an argument playing out across the entire party right now. Does the path back to power in a difficult national environment run through caution establishment-backed candidates who can reassure swing voters, or through sharper, unapologetically progressive candidates who can generate real grassroots energy and turnout? Michigan Democrats are about to answer that question with an actual vote, not just a poll or a punditry debate, and whichever way it breaks is going to shape exactly how the party thinks about candidate recruitment in competitive states for years to come. The stakes attached to this specific seat make the outcome even heavier. Whoever wins this primary will face Republican Mike Roger in November in a race Democrats consider essential if they're serious about winning back the Senate majority. Recent pollings have shown that this Democratic primary itself statistically tied between El-Sayed and Stevens, which means Michigan Democrats are heading into their final weeks before voting with a race that's both ideologically consequential and genuinely too close to call. There's also a real question hovering over this entire contest about what actually happens to McMurray's supporters now that she's out. She explicitly declined to endorse either remaining candidates, choosing instead to stay neutral and let her supporters decide for themselves. El-Sayed moved quickly to call them directly, framing his campaign as the continuation of exactly the kind of anti-establishment fight McMurray herself represented. Whether her voters actually migrate towards him, split between both remaining candidates, or simply stay at home entirely coming primary day is one of the genuine unknowns that could decide this race entirely. What makes this moment worth watching closely isn't just the outcome itself, it's what that outcome signals about where the Democratic Party is actually heading in the middle of genuinely difficult midterm cycle. As Stephen Wynn reinforces the argument that experience and institutional backing still carry real weight with primary voters even in anti-establishment mood. El-Sayed Wynn adds Michigan to a growing list of states where the party's progressive wing has out-organized and out-energized its establishment counterpart. A pattern that would force national Democratic leadership to seriously reckon what kind of candidates actually win in competitive terrain. One reason this race has attracted so much national attention is that political strategists often look beyond the final winner. This study turned out patterns, demographic shift, fundraising performance, and coalitions building to better understand what message resonates with voters. Even if Michigan's primary produces a narrow victory, the underlying data generated during the campaign could influence how both parties approach competitive Senate races across the country in future election cycles. That's why observers far outside Michigan are paying even closer attention. For campaign professionals, this election simply isn't about one Senate seat. It's an opportunity to test competing political strategies in one of America's most important battleground states. It's an opportunity to test competing ideological and political strategies in one of America's most important battleground states. The lessons learned here may shape campaign decisions well beyond Michigan's borders. Now, before you click away, consider this. 30 days ago, this looked like a competitive three-way primary. Today, it's a direct battle between two very different visions from the future Democratic Party. One candidate is arguing that experience, broad coalition, and institutional support are still the key to winning competitive elections. The other believes that the party's future depends on energizing grassroots voters with a more progressive agenda. In just a few weeks, Michigan voters will decide which path they believe offers the stronger future, not only for their state, but perhaps for Democrats nationwide. And that's why this race deserves your attention, even if you don't live anywhere near Michigan. Political strategists, campaign managers, donors, and party leaders across the country will be studying these results long after the votes are counted. They'll be asking whether outside spending proved decisive, whether grassroots organizing overcame establishment support, and whether the Democratic electorate is moving in a new direction. The answers could shape campaign strategies in competitive Senate races for years to come. So now I want to hear from you. Which approach do you think gives Democrats the best chance of winning in November, the establishment strategy presented by Haley Stevens or the progressive vision championed by Abdul El-Sayed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below because I'd love to see where this community stands before Michigan voters make their final decision. If you found this breakdown helpful, share it with someone who's following the fight for control of the Senate. One conversation can often lead to a much better understanding of what's really happening between the headlines. So if you want an in-depth, fact-based coverage of the races that could decide the balance of power in Washington, make sure you subscribe and turn your notifications on. Over the next few weeks, we'll continue following every major development, every new poll, and every shift that could change the outcome, not just Michigan, but across the country. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.